Okay. You seem kind of lackadaisical about this. I'm telling you that this woman is probably going to die and has named you as the person that's harmed her. It kind of, doesn't sit easy with me that you're just so nonchalant about this.
19-year-old Audreanna Zimmerman was born on April 13, 1990. Though not much information is available on her life, she did live in Escambia County in Florida in a mobile park home. While there, she befriended 3 neighbors, 39-year-old Tina Brown, her 16-year-old daughter Brittany Miller, and 27-year-old Heather Lee. However, the relationships between Audreanna and Tina and her daughter Brittany became volatile at some point and often escalated to violence. Tina accused Audreanna of slashing her tires before, but Audreanna accused Tina of shattering a window in her car, having her boyfriend arrested, and reporting to the Florida Department of Children and Families that Audreanna was not properly taking care of her children. On multiple occasions, Heather intervened to stop physical altercations between Tina's daughter Brittany and Audreanna. One day, Brittany found out that Audreanna recently had sexual relations with her boyfriend and attempted to hit her. Audreanna, in this instance, defended herself by attempting to disable Brittany with a stun gun. Later that day, Brittany told her mother Tina that Audreanna used a stun gun on her, to which Tina said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Days later, Tina invited Audreanna to her home to allegedly rekindle their friendship. Tina, Brittany, Heather, and Brittany's 13-year-old friend were all inside the trailer. Tina and Heather were in the kitchen, and Heather told Tina the proper way to use a stun gun. Brittany then pulled her friend aside to tell her, "We're fixing to kill Audreanna. Don't tell anyone, or we'll kill you too." After 9 p.m., Audreanna came into the trailer expecting a conversation. However, after several minutes, Tina pulled out the stun gun and used it on Audreanna multiple times as vengeance. Once Audreanna lost muscular control and fell to the floor, Tina continued to use the stun gun on her while she screamed and cried for help. Eventually, Tina pulled her across the trailer into her bathroom. Audreanna continued to scream and cry for help, so Brittany hit her in the face and Heather stuffed a sock in her mouth. Audreanna was then forced outside and into the trunk of Tina's car. All 4 of them entered the vehicle and drove away. The women drove to a clearing in the woods about 1.5 miles from the trailer park. Tina left the car and pulled Audreanna out of the trunk, and she attempted to run off. In the midst of her running, she stumbled in the darkness and was eventually caught by Tina and Brittany. They both wrestled her to the ground and beat on her. Tina kept using the stun gun again while Brittany beat on her with the crowbar and then switched weapons to continue to torture and beat Audreanna. At some point, Tina dropped her stun gun and began punching her repeatedly. She then walked back to her car, grabbed a can of gasoline from the trunk, and came towards the beaten and vulnerable, but still conscious, Audreanna. Tina poured gasoline all over her, took a lighter from her pocket, and set her on fire. All 3 of the girls watched her body engulfed with flames as she screamed to death. Brittany began exuberantly jumping up and down while screaming, "Burn, bitch, burn." After a few minutes, the 3 women returned to the car and drove away. On their way back to the trailer, Brittany told Tina, "Mom, you've got to turn around. I left my shoes in the taser." Tina, however, refused to return back to the location and continued to drive. When they returned back to the trailer, Tina and Brittany removed their blood-stained clothes and placed it in a trash bag. Heather removed her blood-stained shoes and threw them in the bag. Brittany told her 13-year-old friend, who stayed behind throughout the ordeal, that she injured her hand hitting Audreanna and that they all set her on fire. After, Brittany and her friend used Tina's car to drive to the hospital and get medical care for her hand. Brittany threw the trash bag in a dumpster and attempted to clean the bloodstains from the inside of Tina's car. However, a third of a mile away from the burn site, Terrence Hendrick was sitting outside his home when he heard a faint female voice asking for help, but he could not see where it was coming from in the dark. Eventually, he saw a figure of someone slowly walking towards his house. It was Audreanna. Once Audreanna reached his house, she asked for help and sat on the front steps. As he waited for help on the porch with her, he noticed that she had suffered a significant head injury, didn't appear to be wearing clothes, and had a strong smell of gasoline. All he could see was that her skin was completely black, and he could not identify her race. At 9:24 p.m., an emergency medical technician arrived at the house. When the EMT approached Audreanna, he observed that she was sitting on the porch rocking back and forth with her arms straight out. Due to the extensive nature of Audreanna's burns, the EMT couldn't identify at first whether she was wearing clothing. He also noticed that her skin was falling off her body. Approximately over 90% of her body was burned. She had severe head trauma, and her jaw was either broken or severely dislocated. The EMT later stated that the extent and severity of her burns prevented them from providing her medical assistance. He typically placed sterile gauze and oxygen on burns and did not have enough gauze to cover her entire body. He attempted to stabilize her neck, but her skin was so charred to such an extent that he could not touch Audreanna without her skin rubbing off onto his gloves. Despite her massive injuries, Audreanna was still conscious and alert. She identified Tina and Heather as her attackers and told the EMT that she was dragged out of the house, tased, beaten in the head with a crowbar, and then set on fire. She also gave her address as well as their addresses and asked the EMT to look out for her children. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived and transported Audreanna to the hospital. In the ambulance, she kept asking if she was going to recover. She also explained that Tina, Brittany, and Heather poured gasoline on her and set her on fire, even though she thought they made up. She was then stabilized at the local hospital before being transferred to the burn unit in Mobile, Alabama. With the information Audreanna shared, police officers arrested Tina and Heather soon after the attack, and Brittany was arrested after she left the hospital the following morning. Days after, the women were released from jail. During that time, Tina told her friend Pamela Valley that the three of them had beaten Audreanna, forced her into their car, drove her to an open field, and in her words, lit her on fire and didn't look back. A few days later, Tina told Pamela that Audreanna was still alive and requested for her to finish her off. She declined and later reported this conversation to the police. Horrifically, Audreanna succumbed to her injuries and passed away 16 days after the attack on April 9, 2010. With the news of her death, the women were arrested once again, but for this time, murder. Her cause of death was multiple thermal injuries, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. At the site of the burning, police officers found several pieces of evidence, including Brittany's shoes, a stun gun with blood on the handle, paper stained with blood, and an orange, gold, and black hair weave, a crowbar, and a pool of blood. After searching Tina's car, they found more blood on the passenger seat headrest, which later matched Audreanna Zimmerman. The blood on the stun gun also matched Tina Brown, and while interviewing her on the night of the attack, they noticed she was missing a large section of hair from the back of her head, similar to the hair they discovered at the scene. During the trial, there was an extensive focus on Tina Brown's rough life and upbringing. In sum, they described it as deficient, destructive, and abusive, and at the time of the crime, she was broken in a lot of places. Nonetheless, the jury convicted Tina Brown of first-degree murder. 5 days later, the jury recommended the death sentence by a unanimous vote, and she was sentenced to death on September 28, 2012. Tina apologized to the victim's family and stated that Audreanna died a horrific death, and I was one of the ones who participated in taking her life. She didn't deserve it at all. When questioned about the motive, Tina said Heather instigated the whole ordeal, telling her that Audreanna called Crime Stoppers on her. Heather Lee denied any involvement and said she was actually home all night cooking. However, several witnesses recalled her saying that she was the one who set Audreanna on fire. Heather was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder after taking a plea agreement with the state to avoid the death penalty and instead testified against Tina. Finally, Brittany Miller pleaded no contest to her role in the murder and kidnapping. Despite her involvement in the crimes, she could not be legally sentenced to death as she was only 16 at the time. In 2013, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In March 2022, Tina's lawyers attempted to appeal her death sentence due to new evidence of false testimony during the trial. One witness confessed to falsely testifying against Tina and minimizing Heather Lee's involvement during trial, as she was threatened by Heather to do so. However, the court denied the motion as it wasn't made in a timely manner, and even if it was, it wouldn't have changed her sentencing since there was overwhelming evidence that Tina was the instigator and primary aggressor. Audreanna Zimmerman lived a short life with a horrific ending. May she rest peacefully in paradise, and may her 3 attackers forever suffer the consequences of their crimes in taking her life. Thank you all for watching.